What's up, everybody, and welcome to BioS3 Raw TV. This is a follow-up video to my Anabolic Threshold video. So this is Anabolic Threshold number 2. And I had an interesting conversation with an individual yesterday in the morning at the gym. Now, this guy's a biochemist. He works in DC at some big lab, which is for like the national biochemistry, whatever. So he's kind of a hot shot. He's an older guy. And he actually overheard a conversation that we were saying, because we were kind of loud. Let me adjust this camera angle a little better. There we go. We were kind of loud. We're talking about how we thought that when we were younger, people told us steroids didn't work, and throughout the years how we've seen how much that they do work on the physique. And he kind of laughed and he said, there's a good friend of his, a very good friend of his, who is a textbook writer of biochemistry. And these textbooks are still inside colleges and universities right now. And this guy actually wrote the part of the text that talks about the androgen receptor. And he goes on to explain to us that this section in the book teaches that steroids, anabolic steroids, cannot cause an anabolic response at all. Period. It cannot. Because the androgen receptor gets so saturated so fast that it cannot use the drug. Now, apparently, this guy was explaining to us that that is an absolute fact. Okay, so as soon as you start taking testosterone or whatever you're taking, your receptor gets zapped like that. There's no doubt about it. It's been proven over and over again scientifically. The receptor is saturated. It does not use any more of the drug. Now, although what we see is contrary. We see people growing all the time off steroids. And so does this guy who is this biochemist, was telling us, yeah, he goes, I've been in the gym for 30 years, and I see the same thing. People grow. So he said, obviously, and also the guy who wrote the text, he said they can't understand why this happens. He said, but he theorizes, and this is a big thing about science, he theorizes that it's other receptors that are in the muscle tissue that are very similar to the androgen receptor, almost like cousins of the androgen receptor, that utilize the drug in an anti-catabolic way, which makes the growth happen. And he said, these things will be almost identical, except they work a lot better than the androgen receptor using the drug. And there's many more of them, which means that you would get more of the drug into the muscle tissue, stimulating for more growth. Now, this is interesting because Dan Duchesne had theorized that you could hypersensitize your receptors, your androgen receptors, because Dan wasn't a biochemist, but he studied some shit, into using more of the drug and getting better results. Now, Dan may have been right, but wrong at the same time. The androgen receptor would be full, but if there was more of these receptors, and millions more of these receptors that would absorb the drug anti-catabolically in the muscle tissue the same way to make the muscle grow, yes, the more you took and it didn't bind to the androgen receptor and spilled over to the other ones, the more those receptors would get a crack at it and the more you would grow. Now, how many more receptors are there? Nobody knows. And Dan was talking about using 10,000 milligrams of testosterone a day and hypersensitizing these receptors. Now, there's a good possibility that even on 10,000 milligrams of testosterone a day, now you're going to get side effects like crazy, so you'd have to use stuff to combat the side effects, that it could spill over and these receptors could handle it. That's the problem that we have right now is, just like this guy Milton was explaining to me in the gym, nobody studied this, and they're not going to study this. They have bigger things that they're on to try to help people in other ways rather than learning how far can you push the human body to absorb anabolic steroids to build muscle. It's not on their priority list, and nobody's going to fund a study like that. So it's basically down to theories. He said, but the real biochemists, not the armchair biochemists on the internet who all claim to know shit about pharmacokinetics and all that bullshit, like some of these assholes on the message boards, not these guys, the actual guys doing this, see the fact that, the higher the dosage, the more it could actually be used by these other receptors and grow muscle tissue. And they're fascinated. This guy is fascinated by this because it's uncharted territory. Nobody's ever really done anything with it. And he sees stuff that, the other scientists who don't go to the gym and train, we're around these big bodybuilders. He sees it in the gym. This thing is working like this. They're taking this. This is what's happening. But that's not supposed to happen. So how the fuck is it happening? And he has to theorize himself. And he actually does a lot of work on his own, in his own spare time, to try to figure out how these things work just because he wants to. So it's kind of interesting that, he happens to be in my gym where I like to talk about this stuff. So I'm going to try to, I only run into him once in a while. I'm going to try to see if I can get him on film explaining, a little better than a little differently than I can, because, sometimes he says stuff and I just have no fucking clue what he's saying because it's very scientific, and I'm not a scientist. I'm a guy with a YouTube channel. So So that's our scoop for today with the androgen anabolic threshold is there is a possibility the higher that the dosage goes, the more it spills over into these other receptors that use it the same way, not in an anabolic way, anti-catabolic way that causes more growth. Biohackertraining@gmail.com. Leave comments down below. www.biohackertraining.com is the blog, and we're not the androgen anti-catabolic bicep out.